Hi everybody, I'm standing in a field south of the Rose House. Trust me, it's behind me, behind those trees and bushes. The Rose House is there. You might be able to see some of the ruins of the barn off in the distance there. You know, the Rose House is not much thought of during the Battle of Gettysburg. It's not like the Sherfy farm or, you know, one of the Weikert houses or the Trossos or the Cadoris or something like that. And so this place really remained rather obscure. People didn't really think a whole lot of fighting was really taking place here. That is, until William Frazanito, the photo historian, put this place on the map by determining that not 1, not 2, not 5, not 10, but 12 or even 14 photos of dead soldiers were taken here on the Rose Farm. And that's what this place is known for now. For better or for worse, this is the most extensive death study of the Civil War. 14 negatives, 55 bodies, and we know the locations of 12 of those particular negatives, and we know the other ones are on the Rose Farm nonetheless. Okay, so you know, if there are only about 103, there are more than we knew before, photos of dead soldiers in the Civil War. You know, here it is, 15% of them roughly, or 14% of them roughly, right here on the Rose Farm in a tight configuration. William Frazanito was able to figure this out, and he was able to plot them on a map. He did this first in his Gettysburg, A Journey in Time, and then he did it later in this book, Early Photography at Gettysburg, an absolute masterpiece, and I don't know of another book that includes more information about the Gettysburg battlefield and its photographic coverage than this. Nothing else is even close, if you ask me. Packed full of information. I don't get any proceeds, but Early Photography at Gettysburg, mostly on the secondary market now, but I think it's still in print as well. You can find it, and it's worth it, okay? But before we get into that, we have to talk a little bit about the fighting here, because the Rose Farm was right in the path of Joseph B. Kershaw's attack of South Carolinians. And of course, Kershaw is part of a much larger attack. McLaws' division. McLaws' division is part of Longstreet's attack on July 2nd, which consisted of Hood's division, McLaws' division, and part of A.P. Hill's Anderson's division. They're all going to come in this area and a big attack, maybe an echelon with one group attacking, then another, and then, you know, it will become the largest attack at Gettysburg, considerably larger than and more costly than Pickett's charge. 9,000 casualties are going to be suffered just around the Rose and Sherfy farms that includes the wheat field here. So it's a terrible fight, and we have a lot of black holes. We don't know exactly what happened where because of supporting brigades coming up and whatnot. But in summary, after Law's Alabama Brigade and the Texas Brigade attacked Devil's Den and Little Round Top, you're next going to have George Tige Anderson attacking into the wheat field, and then come some of McLaws' brigades, namely Joseph Brevard Kershaw's South Carolinians, eventually followed up by John Paul Semmes's Georgians, okay? Semmes used to be in what is now Benning's brigade fighting at Devil's Den, and here they are now fighting in this nondescript field. The fighting is not here at first, actually. Kershaw pushes, and it's a huge brigade, more than 2,000 soldiers, and they are going to push on both sides of the Rose Farm, some going toward the peach orchard, which is kind of over my right shoulder over there, and others coming right to this area. If they go into these woods and down this hill, which they did, they came out into the wheat field. But the Union soldiers at this point then launch an entire division, Caldwell's division, across Kelly, Zook, and Brook. There's some brigades in a division for you, and they are going to sweep or clear the wheat field, and they're going to chase the Confederates back as Anderson's Georgians and Kershaw's South Carolinians end up falling back to this area. Caldwell's division, some Brooks Brigade, actually comes right to that fence you see over there, and it's probably in this firefight that you're going to have the casualties that are going to fall right here, okay? Now, between Frazanito's work and between the excellent Gettysburg, is it Death? Yeah, Guide to Gettysburg's Confederate Dead by Greg Coco. Great book that really talks about the burial locations of it. We have all sorts of examples of where it's from, and I've tried to expand upon what Frazanito and Coco have done by trying to get these things. And you see cryptic messages that, for instance, 14 men of the 8th South Carolina, 7 of the 7th, and 1 of the 1st were buried in barn back or north of Rose House. Okay. Great, there's the Rose Barn, we know where that is. There's other things like that. Back barn under cherry tree. In crooked area far back of Privy, in front of house a few yards. What interests me the most are those soldiers who were buried, south of Rose's house, edge of woods, okay? There's also sometimes described the field above the Rose house that I think this might also be. And this is, of course, an attempt to get an idea of who in the world we're looking at when we see these photos. So with that, let's walk over here, Chris. So we're standing at, you know, the place where Frazanito really recognized, you know, that a whole bunch of various photos labeled dead of the Iron Brigade, dead of the 24th Michigan, dead of the 1st Minnesota, that all these photos taken all over the battlefield were in fact not taken all over the battlefield. They were all the same bodies. And they recognized that, he recognized that, oh, I lost my page again, because of a guy who happened to have a bent knee, and his bent knee was sticking up in the air, and he noticed the guy with the bent knee in numerous photographs, and I'll show you those right now. Sorry. Let's first see him right here. See the bent knee sticking up right there? And then, oh, there he is again. And okay, he's outside of the view of that one, but you can see him in other views as well. He also recognized a particularly distinctive rock with a split in it right here. I'm not sure if you're seeing that, Chris, or if you're trying to pull up photos there. But you can really see a rock with a distinctive split in it. And of course, it is right above the book right here, okay? So if you can see this rock right here, and you can see that one over there, you know where we're standing. So you can see this is his split rock right here. And then that begs the question, well, where are these two rocks and this boulder here next to these soldiers? Okay, well, these two rocks are right there. And this rock with a distinctive crack in it right here next to this soldier. I mean, not only is the boulder still there, but here's the crack. It's right here. So Frazanito's work was greatly helped by the fact that there are boulders in this part of the battlefield, that the last place cleared of its dead, you know, were actually an area where there were boulders that would help you identify the location. So what I'm saying is that they were buried here and later exhumed, so they are presumably not here anymore. There was a line of 4 or 5 soldiers right here, okay, and then follow me to the next spot. There were 2 almost identical photos actually taken from here. So take a look here. Do you see this rock right here, Chris? There it is, okay? In other words, you can see 3 soldiers here next to that rock right there, no doubt. And if you look at the companion view, you can actually see the rock there and a larger line of soldiers, including the guy with the bent knee. If you actually look at it, Frazanito determined that you could see that the burial operations were going on while this series was being recorded, okay? Let's just remember too, each of these is a soldier, and you know, for my money, in looking at Coco's work and looking at Frazanito's work, we know a lot of the soldiers buried on the Rose Farm are South Carolinians, but the ones in this field seem to be Georgians, and they seem to belong to Anderson's brigade. Again, they're part of Hood's division that went into the wheat field and fell back under the attack of Caldwell's division. So pretty interesting. Some people have always also suggested, and some of the burials here are definitely part of Semmes's Georgia Brigade, which came up in support and engaged in a firefight across this field with Union soldiers before advancing here. And that's probably when some of these happened. And somewhere out there, General Paul Semmes was actually killed somewhere out in that field as well. So here are 2 more locations. And if you're ready, Chris, we'll walk on somewhat silently to 2 more. So first of all, let's look at the one at the top here, okay? You can see the guy with the bent knee again, okay? And we're standing right next to the rock where this was, right? So we know the bent knee guy is right there. We also know that that next rock over, that there was a line of bodies over there too, right? So this is sort of what Frazanito was doing, is setting up like sort of in his experience, a 1970s virtual reality where you could come to understand things in a 360-degree environment. And before I ever came here, I understood some of this because of his presentation, and so did he. And that's what allowed him to actually discover the site. Now for another one, the photographer went even closer to this rock on the left. So if you actually look, you're looking at the tip of that rock right there. And you can see it here, the same soldiers and the guys around that rock, and another line of bodies there off in the distance that we'll talk about later. Okay, so they're in groups here. They've been gathered for burial, presumably by Confederates, but who couldn't finish the job before they had to fall back, okay? One other interesting thing about these 2 is we know exactly where Gardner's photographic wagon was parked, right there, because you are running glass plates on this hot day back and forth between that photo wagon, back and forth. Okay, now there's no surprise that this is the last area cleared of its dead. It's rocky, it's farthest from town, and it's Confederates. This was a Union-held battlefield. They're obviously going to bury their own first, and then they're going to bury Confederate soldiers here. So we've still got more to go, but just know that this is just an example of the hallowed ground on battlefields here. Just because we happen to have photos doesn't make this ground any more hallowed than other parts of the battlefield where we know there was fighting. And whenever there was fighting, soldiers died and they dug a hole there and put you in it. So this, however, happens to be our best opportunity to engage with this difficult and controversial subject of death on a battlefield. It happens, we know it happened, it shocked the nation, absolutely. You know, who thought war maybe was a bit glorious until they saw their soldiers pressed to the earth, far from home, the opposite of a good death. Okay, so keep that stuff in mind. I mean, I think it's important to come to this place and not glorify it at the same sense, because each of these soldiers, you know, had a family, as Fresnito says, waiting at home for some word, you know, as to their whereabouts, probably in Georgia, probably in South Carolina, and they're just waiting. And now they are disfigured. Some of them have been, you know, disemboweled by, you know, wild boars and whatnot. And it's just a terrible situation to think about. And that is why Fresnito calls, and so many other people do, war the greatest of obscenities. This is probably the most well-known of all the photos, the V formation, often called Dead of the 24th Michigan, thought to have been taken on the first day's field, is in fact taken right here. And were we to actually look in right past that fence there, this boulder is still there and it looks exactly the same, okay? Not only do we know it because of the boulder, but these bodies also show in other directions some of the same bodies that we've already seen. Now there's some erosion in this area, and a few of them. Well, first of all, this area has been, you know, grazed by cattle, and plus these bodies were exhumed, and you know, after they were buried and exhumed, it really weakened the soil, and there's going to be a lot of erosion in some of the very areas where these soldiers were. Now we're looking at the same V formation, but from a different angle. You can see these soldiers lined up in a V here. You could see some of them have had, you know, a belt or something, you know, sort of wrapped around their legs to make it easier to drag them into position so they could more effectively make a burial trench. You might be able to see this boulder right here, and there it is, right above the camera, right above the book on the right. You can also see some of the other bodies and the photo wagon off in the distance there, and the split rock we were talking about, which is harder to see right now. Okay, so you've got all sorts of clues as to this being, you know, the right place. Now, there's one more version of the V. I'll show it to you now, and it's taken from over there looking this way, but there's so much erosion that we're not going to line that particular one up. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on the Rose Farm, somewhere we haven't come since Gettysburg 154. We did shoot a video live back then, and people had questions and wanted to see more. So Chris White behind the camera and I and I'm Garry Adelman. We are on the Rose Farm at Gettysburg, you know, kind of coming to one of the heaviest places you can go on a battlefield. Not a whole lot to go by right here, but there is a one or two photos actually taken here. I showed you this line of bodies earlier when we were looking at the V formation, looking this way. And you can see a lot of the soldiers here, like I said, face pressed to the earth. One soldier just sadly, you know, has had his pants come down, and, you know, he is exposed to the elements. Again, the antithesis of a good death. Imagine if that is, you know, your loved one. I'm kind of glad we can't see his face, but we can see some of the other faces, you know, of death, convulsed in death over there, and some distinctive rocks that allowed Fresnito to find this particular location. There's actually a story about that rock. Fresnito highlighted it. It was stolen. Somebody put a ransom note, like it's at my fireplace. Then it was returned, and now it's missing again. You know, I don't know why people feel the need to do this, especially from a place like this. We're not going to go out there, but right on the other side of the fence, the rarest of the rare is these South Carolinians laid out for battle. You do not see this one in books, as well as a couple of the other ones on the Rose Farm, because you know, there are hardly any extant versions of them. We're going to come over here and line up our last one or two, actually, and get ready, because these are the roughest ones of all, in my opinion. So you've probably seen this before. This is a soldier, again, who charged in a battle, you know, looking like you or I, just days before this photo was taken. And now he is more than a nameless corpse. He has been disemboweled. This caption says by an artillery shell, but probably by, you know, a pig or a boar. His hand is detached. His shoulder socket is visible. His lips and his eyes are absolutely bulging out of his head. Easily the most disturbing photo of the Civil War. Gardner, the photographer, no doubt placed the, you know, the gun and the canteen and the artillery shell and maybe even the hand right near him. And what you're looking at is a plate version, a close-up, and a stereo view of this poor man, again, who is very much alive and has a family somewhere at home. And you're looking at the woods right there. The Park Service has done a great job restoring the official original wood lines here. And some of these same rocks are some of the boulders that we've already talked about, and the same fence we've already talked about. So Fresnito really nailed this thing shut. And it's an important place to visit. The Park Service has recently opened up a gap in the fence where you can legitimately access this field. It's off of Brook Avenue, across from sort of the 53rd Pennsylvania Monument. And, you know, why should you come here? Well, I mean, if we're going to study this subject, you know, I think it's important to take it all in as it is. And it's important to know as well that the Union and Confederate soldiers here, just like the American and British soldiers in the American Revolution and in other wars too, these things were fought by people who were either coerced, but more likely citizen soldiers, especially that's the American experience, citizen soldiers who volunteered, who signed up, okay? And while we're looking at a Confederate position here, whether it be Union or Confederate, this is what a battlefield looked like for the citizen soldiers who ultimately secured our freedom, made the Declaration of Independence real, made the Emancipation Proclamation real. So literally, despite anything that Congress could do or that, you know, local courts could do at courthouses and whatnot, it's the citizen soldiers, people like you see in these terrible pictures, you know, north, south, and in the drawings of the American Revolution that ultimately made this country, imperfect as it is, what it is today. So we thank you for joining us here at the Rose Farm. Thanks to Chris for filming all this. Thank you all for not only watching, but for sharing this with your friends, because we think people need to see this, and of course for supporting battlefield preservation.